Good evening, everyone. It is evening. Welcome to the opening event of the, let's practice again, Art plus Tech times Cosmos equals. Yes, we had to make it so complicated, didn't we? I am Joasia Krysa, Professor of Exhibition Research, Director of Institute of Art and Technology at Liverpool School of Art and Design, Liverpool John Moores University, a long title. Together with Nuno Crespo, with Daniel Ribas, Jose Alberto Gomez, I hope I'm pronouncing names correctly, we co-curated this program. It is 12 weeks, or around 12 weeks, until end of May, every Thursday or so. So I just want to start with, first of all, saying it's a fantastic pleasure to be here again, actually. And thanks for the invitation to Nuno, Daniel, to the school. Thanks for those who helped to organize the program. Patricia in particular, Patricia Fontes, who's been fantastic with helping us to organize ourselves and be here, but also everyone else who contributed. And of course, thanks to all our contributors to the program. I will talk about it in a minute, a little bit more. But all the wonderful curators, artists, thinkers, writers that accepted our invitation to be part of the program. And of course, thanks to you for being here and for participating too. And I hope you enjoy the evening. So, I need to resort to my glasses. I want to start with saying a little bit about the program, so introduce a little bit of the program concept. And then I will introduce our guests. And then the plan is that we will have 20 minutes presentation from each of the guests, followed by conversation and discussion. So the program explores the intersection of art and technology, reflecting on historical and contemporary landscape from an expanded perspective that foregrounds diverse cultural contexts, practices, and narratives. And at the core of it, it is our recognition that technology is never a neutral force. It is always entangled with and shaped by the ways in which a culture understands its world and its life forms. In other words, cosmos. Hence, we have a cosmos in our title. So, art, technology, cosmos. And today, this approach is becoming even more relevant in the current era of artificial intelligence and accelerated technological development. And it's important to challenge the homogenizing force of Western technological universalism and colonialist technologies. So instead, through this program and through various presentations, what we propose is a plural versal, not universal, but plural versal, understanding of technology grounded in diverse cultural and metaphysical traditions. And in this, we draw upon Hong Kong philosopher Yu Hui, I'm sure you're very familiar, who described this through the term of technodiversity, which is the concept that describes multiplicity of technological imaginary shaped by distinct cultural histories, myths, and worldviews. So in this program and through the presentation, we draw on such epistemologies derived from cosmotechnics of Yu Hui, Afrofuturism, decolonial thinking, technofeminism, and beyond. And through this, we aim to explore how art and technology are entangled, how creative practices respond to growing complexity of the world today, how these diverse histories and futures converge to generate new understandings, new narratives, new knowledges, and new forms that neither art or tech can access alone in singular form. So with this program, we bring together some of the most significant voices that shape the field of art technology today: artists, creative technologists, writers, thinkers, curators, with contributions extending across several constellations, from spiritual to the mythical, socio-technological infrastructures, the colonial logics to speculative futures. And I just want to mention, today we have curators Val Ravaglia and Pita Arreola. We also feature Legacy Russell, Gunzeli Yalcin Kaya, artists Diana Policarpo, João Melo, Danielle Brefway Shirley, Kaiken, Libby Hini, Tabitha Rezer, and others. So, the event today, we have a title, yes, behind us. So today is our first opening event entitled Cosmic Circuits, Curating the Technological Imagination Before and After the Internet, and it will become clear why this title in a moment. And we are truly honored to welcome Val Ravaglia and Pita Arreola, London-based curators, whose contributions resonate very strongly in the field today and very strongly with this program. Val is a curator at Tate Modern in London and recently curated a seminal large-scale exhibition, Electric Dreams, Art and Technology Before the Internet. That was on show 2024-25, highlighting art that takes inspiration from scientific innovation between 1950s and the early 90s. And Pita Arreola is co-editor of the seminal book Digital Art 1960s to Now, published by V&A and Thames and Hudson in 24, exploring the histories of digital art. And Pita, throughout her career in various capacities, worked with over 200 artists from across the globe, developing experimental projects that critically explore the social impact of emerging technologies. So, brief introductions before I venture into longer introductions. So there will be introductions to introductions. So just to remind, the structure for today is 20 minutes presentation with from Val and then Pita, and then we have the floor for discussion. We have a conversation open for discussion. So, without further ado, let me introduce more properly Val now. Again, Val, as I already mentioned, is a curator of international art at Tate Modern in London. They have a special interest in transdisciplinary curatorial practices and, as I've already mentioned, curated large-scale exhibition Electric Dreams, Art and Technology Before the Internet in 24-25. And I think it's important to say that this is first such a large-scale exhibition that brings together and reflects historical work from art and technology field of that scale. I think the other seminal kind of reference that comes to mind in 1968, ICA exhibitions, Cybernetic Serendipity. So that's fantastic that this exhibition happened, and very timely exhibition. And currently, the show is open in Turin until May 2026 in the space OGR. Maybe you can explain later what it stands for. But if you're in Italy, in Turin, you can still see it until May. Val assisted on complete rehang of Tate Modern displays in the run-up to the museum expansion in June 2016. And they were also assistant curator for the 2017 Turbine Hall Commission by Superflex, it's Danish group Superflex, and for Tate Modern's Namjoon Pike retrospective in 2019. And they have also curated the free exhibit A Year in Art, Australia 1992, and led on touring Tate exhibition The Dynamic Eye Beyond Op and Kinetic Art. For its version in Porto, so I guess it's not the first time Val is here in Porto, and she can tell us about that in a moment, and the version that also traveled to Istanbul in 2024. And our next exhibition, and for those who are planning to be in London, it opens soon in June 2026, is a solo exhibition of Julio Le Parc. So Val will talk about precisely the idea behind this talk was to go to discuss Electric Dreams, Art and Technology Before the Internet, which is, as I mentioned, a major project, major exhibition, very timely, that brings together stories about artists who found inspiration in methods and tools of science and technology to amplify the formal possibilities and sensorial reach of their work. I think I just leave it to you, Val, now to introduce it. We have a short introduction probably on the website, but I leave it, and we start with that. So warm welcome. Thanks again for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Test. Yes, here I am. I didn't realize, thank you very much for your introduction, by the way. Didn't realize I put spoilers for the presentation in my introduction. So expect some slides to illustrate what's just been said. How do we start the presentation now? Oh, there you go. So I'm here to speak about Electric Dreams, Art and Technology Before the Internet, which took place at Tate Modern in 24 and 25. And I wanted to give a little bit of an insight on the curatorial thinking behind the exhibition, which was historical group exhibition looking at different ways in which artists took inspiration in the methods and tools of science and technology between the 1950s and the early 1990s. Organizes a number of loosely connected case studies of individual artists with monographic rooms, alternating with thematic group rooms that also looked at particular events, such as key exhibitions or series of exhibitions. And overall, the exhibition aimed at presenting a network of stories about art and tech in the post-war period in a transnational narrative that could provide the context for the rise of early digital art. But also starting from an analog precedence that paved the way for computers and code to be adopted by artists as tools for art making. Now, and here's the spoiler, I was speaking in the past tense, but there's a reduced version of Electric Dreams that is still currently open in Turin. And OGR, which stands for Officine Grandi Riparazioni, it's a former train locomotive repair workshop and incredibly beautiful but hard to work with space. So yeah, if anyone has a chance to go to Italy before the 10th of May, you get to catch a little bit of it. And also the exhibition has a connection to Porto through the Dynamic Eye, which is this touring exhibition featuring works of perceptual abstraction from Tate collection that was in Porto for its third installment, but started in Shanghai at MAP and traveled to Istanbul. And then it came to Porto in a venue called the Atkinson Museum. I don't know if any of you has had a chance to see it back in 2023. So the show was initiated by a different Tate curator, Clara Kim, but I took over this project from her when she left Tate, and I was responsible for its staging in Porto. So it was really my baby to bring it to Porto. And the concept also was based on some of my research that I initially did for collection displays at Tate Modern. So when I was asked to take over this exhibition project, it kind of felt like a full circle moment, and even more so a full circle now that I'm here talking about it. So the link with Electric Dreams is that my initial brief for bringing this exhibition to Tate Modern was to adapt the Dynamic Eye, bring the Dynamic Eye to Tate Modern with some loans in, expanded a little bit from just collection works. And I reckoned that it was important instead to expand on the curatorial premise for that exhibition, which was set up similarly as a series of sort of groupings around particular exhibitions or events that were key moments in the history of optical and kinetic art. But stopped short of showing the links with the adoption of computers. even though it contained aspects of, for example, the New Tendencies movement, which I then would go on to adopt as kind of a key point in Electric Dreams, as we'll see. And so when I was given this brief, I was begging our director of program to let me kind of tweak the concept a little bit. I mean, already then the conversation around generative art was quite virulent, and it felt like an important thing to do to provide the historical context for what generative art, for where it came from, what it actually meant to artists beginning from those that adopted the concept of generating arts using mathematical algorithms in a completely analog way. And the fact that the geometric abstract type of work that were at the core of the New Tendencies, for example, but not only, was an important bridge for this. So it was important for me to do this and to also reconfigure it as a sort of mapping of the field of the relationship between art and technology in the post-war years. But also I was aware of the fact that it couldn't be a complete encyclopedic style exhibitions. Group exhibitions rarely can be exhaustive. They end up being more exhausting than exhaustive, if anything. And so I decided from the get-go that I wanted to be quite open with the visitors that what you're about to encounter is a series of case studies that connect to one another, but in no way should an exhibition like that be understood as covering the entirety of the field. And so one of the things that I set out to do from the get-go was to map out the exhibition and to create this kind of infographic diagram. I don't know how legible it is, but fear not, because I've magnified it a little bit. And the diagram only applies to what was included in the exhibition. It's not meant to be a sort of McEwen's Flux-style diagram of everything. Well, I mean, those also leave out a lot, but, you know, McEwen's intent with those diagrams was to be quite encyclopedic, whereas I just wanted to map the exhibition. And I also did it by literally, you know, marking the room numbers. And so for those that were actually paying attention to what this diagram was supposed to do, it was also a map of the show itself, so you could follow along. And it was also because, curatorially speaking, one of the things that is always a challenge is the physical makeup of an exhibition space prevents connections between rooms in a physical way, in a way that you can do with, you know, a hypertext or referencing things if it's a written text like an essay. But in an exhibition, you kind of have to be careful about overloading your visitor with information and, you know, to remind them about things that they're supposed to keep in mind as they're visiting. So I thought, you know, if visitors take a picture of this diagram, maybe there's a way that they can follow along with these. So the previous slide was the initial, like the first half of the show, and then the top half covers the second half. I'm also going to bombard you with images now because I have way more slides than time, so bear with me. But I, at the very least, want to cover the main anchor points, which are the group rooms that serve as key moments in the exhibition, around which I sort of attached the monographic rooms. So the chronologically, the first grouping was titled Materializing Invisible Forces, and the group rooms covered the German International Zero movement, Zero and Null, if you consider also the Dutch sort of sister group. And Signals Gallery and a kind of expanded scene in 1960s London where there were artists interested in the field of cybernetics, and kineticism as a kind of demonstration of ecological understanding of art in relationship to its environment and to the viewer, as well as the adoption of certain aspects of technology and reaction to technology from a socio-anthropological perspective, particularly its advancements in inverted commas during the Second World War, as is always the case with technology for military purposes. And so this is actually something that carries through the rest of the exhibition as well. There was a lot of artists approaching technology critically, even if the work themselves don't necessarily illustrate those critical points, but the approach of the artists themselves, it was to reclaim the uses of technology from the military-industrial complex and try to repurpose them for humanistic, creative purposes. Then a group room around the concept of the programmed artwork, which borrowed a lot of its principles from the Italian movement Arte Programmata, which itself was one of the key movements around which the international New Tendencies movement was formed in the early 1960s. And I'll talk more about it, so for now I'm just going to move on to Dialogues with the Machines, which was the moment, a room that concentrated on the moment when artists really started using computers and digital code as tools for art making. And a fourth group room was less about key exhibitions and more the attitude of artists adopting a kind of bricolage or DIY attitude by reclaiming literal technology and like dismantling tools and learning how to build their own technological devices, and the sort of feedback loops that made it so that artists would sometimes be in residency in engineering laboratories for corporations or universities, and then feed back to the thinking about the evolution of certain technologies. But also how sometimes they created their own how-to manuals for how to deturn, to borrow the Guy Debord term, the technological tools and make them into something different. Here's some slides to illustrate the various rooms. So zeroing signals, programmed artwork, dialogues with the machines, and then the electronic DIY room. There was also another group room that I kind of considered as an aside from the main ones that looked at experiments in art and technology, the American-founded group. But because it's a particular history that's been told a few times with a lot of focus on its American origins, and Robert Rauschenberg and Billy Kluver as kind of the foundational figures, I wanted instead to put the focus for the room on what they did that was not in the United States. So in particular, the participation in Osaka Expo 70 with the Pepsi Pavilion, and their connections with the NID, or the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. So their Indian connection, which also went by Osaka, and sort of triangulate that transnational scene. Also, looking at the Expo 70 in itself is quite an interesting exercise, because particularly in Japan, but in Europe as well, there was a lot of artists protesting the soft power aspect of something like a world exhibition. And so I included, for example, this is a clicker, right? I can do that. That poster there was a sort of protest manifesto warning artists not to acquiesce to making their work be co-opted by corporations, and the kind of soft power diplomacy that world exhibitions did. 1970 Japan was, historically speaking, a very interesting moment, but sadly I won't have time to get into much detail here about this. It's another image of the kind of Indian and chapter and the Tokyo chapter of experiments in art and technology as well. Kind of a more documentary type room in contrast with the more experiential group rooms that form the sort of spine of the exhibition, of the rest of the exhibition. So just to say a bit more about the importance of the new tendencies, the room itself, I'll show you some images, was kind of sampling a few artists that were exemplary of the types of practices that were key to the new tendencies. And it included Croatian, Brazilian, Italian, Argentinian artists. I'm definitely missing something. But what was interesting to me about the new tendencies at large is that it was already formed as a transnational movement. The story goes that Almir Mavigné, who's the guy standing in the image on the left-hand side, who's a Brazilian artist that had moved to Germany and was studying at the Ulm School of Design, had visited the Venice Biennale in 1960, and then was traveling to Croatia, where he met a number of artists and curators. And so that's already like crossing several countries. And in Croatia, he met with a group of like-minded people that all had started to catch that there was a trend in that moment of perceptual abstraction of kind of abstract geometric work based on mathematical patterns or optical effects. And also a kind of tendency to recover aspects of Russian constructivism, not just for the collectivist and politically driven aspects of that movement, but also the transdisciplinarity of it all, like the fact that art wasn't for those artists meant to only be visual stimuli or aesthetic stimuli, but could penetrate into everyday life and technological understanding of how people interface with reality in deeper philosophical ways. I love the stamp that kind of lists the main languages of the artists that were participating in the new tendencies as well. And then this interest, transdisciplinary interest, would lead them over time to notice that some artists had already started working with computers as tools for art making, and to take an interest in that particular side of things, so that by 1968, the New Tendencies movement overtly incorporated early computer art as one of its main points of interest. This was also because by 1968, the so-called open kinetic art movement had kind of run its disruptive course. It had already been kind of commercialized, and the exhibition, the MoMA exhibition, the dynamic, sorry, that was the Tate one. The Responsive Eye had such a success with public that with the American public in particular, so it felt like it was a kind of a defanged movement, and the New Tendencies realized that there was something, that they needed to push their agendas in new ways, in more radical ways, and they thought that maybe computers were the way to go, and that's one of the reasons why they decided to go down that route. So the exhibition itself, the room itself takes the Tendency 4 and Tendency 5, Tendencies 4 and Tendencies 5 of the series of rooms of exhibition, that the New Tendencies movement organized, as well as Cybernetic Serendipity, the exhibition in London in 1968, as its anchoring points. Already Cybernetic Serendipity was a really important moment of recognition of what had been done so far, and also Jascha Reichardt, the curator of Cybernetic Serendipity at the ICA, framed that exhibition as being on computer in the arts, but also included more historical practices that were more analog, cybernetics, like the history of cybernetics, and had historical, retrospective interpretation panels that told that story. She included Namjoon Paik and his experiments with TVs as well. So it was a more varied exhibition than just computers in the art. And on the other hand, tendencies 4 and 5 was incredibly transnational as well. That's always been at the core of what the New Tendencies movement did. But they invited artists from Japan, from Latin America. I'm going to show you as I speak a few slides to give you an idea. It included works made by Croatian artists that had started experimenting with computers, and some of which, like Vladimir Bonacic, that did the... You see that? Oh, there you go. The light reliefs. He was actually a computer engineer that attended the New Tendencies exhibitions and was inspired to make art, and then participated in the later exhibitions. There were connections with the Arte e Cibernetica exhibitions and the group Arte e Cibernetica from the Centro de Arte y Comunicación in Buenos Aires. And we included catalogs from those exhibitions as well. The poster that features a work by the Computer Technique group, which was a Japanese group. So again, for this exhibition, for Electric Dreams, I really like to bring out those artifacts that really show connections between groups that were interested in art and technology and that didn't necessarily need the USA or Germany, which was the other big center of innovation in computer art, in order to facilitate that communication. Those artists were already in touch. They were already exhibiting together as early as 1968. And this is something that subsequent histories of computer art kind of sidelined, and I wanted to bring that aspect up again. Works by Miguel Angel Vidal, the catalog for Arte Cibernetica, which includes images of work by Gustav Metzger as well, German artist that worked in the UK. To a lesser extent, I also wanted to include Brazilian artists like Valdemar Cordeiro and Ana Lívia Cordeiro, who's the daughter of Valdemar Cordeiro, because Valdemar Cordeiro wanted to do the same, to launch this, a series of exhibitions about art and computers, or art and technology, digital technologies in Brazil as well. But sadly, he would die in 1972. So that's how the adventure of Arteonica, the Arteonica exhibition ended. There was only one, because sadly he wasn't able to continue it. But yes, so Croatia, Latin America, Japan, Brazil as places where computer art was happening. I've included, obviously, a lot of plotter printed works, which is kind of the most recognizable kind of artifacts from early computer art. But I also wanted to make sure that there was a variety of practices and types of physical objects that artists produced from around that time. So the Hiroshi Kawano works, which are some of the earliest actually, there's a work from 1964 in Electric Dreams, was actually a handmade gouache based on digital code. Edward Zayek is Italian. Manuel Barbadillo with a Madrid-based computer collective, or Hervé Huitrik and Monique Nahas, who were part of the group, the Informatique de Vincent. I hope I pronounced that right. But so expanding the scope to Spain and France as well. I also wanted to include sculptural objects, of which there aren't many, but they were also beginning to be made. Robert Mallory's Quad 3 is a work that was included in some form or other, both in Cybernetic Serendipity and in Tendencies 4, and can be considered to be one of the first 3D printed sculptures, although it's 3D printed in the sense that he printed a series of slices of wood that would then be glued together and sanded in order to form a single biomorphic sculpture. Or Helen Levitt's computer mill sculpture, which used an early form of CNCing technique. Again, this is 1971, just to stress that aspect. And from a few years later, I also wanted to feature Harold Cohen, who was already an accomplished painter by the late 1960s when he decided to see if he could teach code, and he knew that anthropomorphizing computers was a slippery slope. So he talked about his code, his program that he called Aaron, anthropomorphizing him a lot, beginning with the fact that he gave it a name. But at the same time, he was very aware that this program was a kind of an early form of artificial intelligence of a narrow kind, that it still needed its scent to be held and the program to be inputted by Harold Cohen himself. And all of the work that he made with the software Aaron was completed by himself by coloring it by hand, for example, although over time he managed to teach the program to color it in as well, and to go from abstraction to figuration. So by the 1990s, Aaron could draw and paint by itself figures in landscapes and color them in as well. And at that point, Harold Cohen was like, I think this is too much. I need to take some of that autonomy back, and nerfed the code, as the kids say, made it so that he still needed to color it in. But I only included in the exhibition some of the earlier examples of the outputs by Aaron, and included also a turtle, that little metal object that is in the vitrine, which was one of the early remote drawing machines that allowed computer outputs to be put to paper or a canvas by scuttling around the paper on the floor, which is something that Harold Cohen did live in exhibitions. I also included Wen-Ying Tsai, a Chinese-American artist that was included in Cybernetic Serendipity, but also worked with the CAVS, the Center for Advanced Visual Studies at MIT. Again, fascinating story that I can't get into, but I urge you all to look into Wen-Ying Tsai and the amazing interactive and immersive works that he did years before some of the artists that would then become famous for doing pretty much the same exact things. How am I doing for time? Should I go on? Yeah? Oh, I'll talk about more. So to loop back on the beginning of the exhibition, I mentioned the importance of cybernetics as a concept, and I wanted the beginning of the exhibition to have almost a sort of compressed argument about evolving perspectives on automation, including certain takes on cybernetics as a concept invented by mathematician Norbert Wiener in the 1940s as part of his studies on Second World War, kind of aiming machines that use feedbacks mechanism in order to correct the aim to take down missiles from moving planes. Norbert Wiener was an incredibly interesting figure as well, in that he came from that military background, but later on would go on to refuse his work to be used for military purposes. I had this work by British artist Vera Spencer that uses jacquard loom punch cards and kind of makes the connection between textile industry and the birth of the computer, in that Charles Babbage based his analytical machine on the jacquard loom, and Ada Lovelace, the first programmer, was also kind of basing her early ideas for programming around the programming of jacquard looms. And then this lovely fanzine style photocopied magazine from 1980s Britain that has this spoof advert at the back that talks about To cure technophobia, you need illusions that work, and the text talks about tricking people into thinking they need to live with automation. It's great. This is the vitrine that also included, I don't have a close-up picture of it, but the poem by Richard Brautigan, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace, which of course is kind of a classic, and of literature and poetry in reflecting on the relationship with technology, and it has this kind of utopian perspective on people living in harmony with machines that allow them to, work less and enjoy life more. And there's still a bit of debate with literary critics about whether it's an earnest poem that really takes itself seriously about that subject, or if it's a spoof of techno-optimism. I think it's more of a parody of techno-optimism myself. And another object in this vitrine is a reproduction of an issue of Page, the Bulletin of the Computer Arts Society, which is a UK organization which was actually founded just after cybernetic serendipity as a way of sort of continue to think about the uses of computer in art. And Gustav Metzger, the artist I mentioned earlier, was the editor of the News Bulletin for many years. What I love about Gustav Metzger in general is that he carries his political commitment throughout anything that he does. And his insertions into the News Bulletin, like he includes kind of critical images that raise the flag about aspects of technology and particularly the history of technology and its relationship with the military power in the years of the Cold War. That was a sort of a way of reminding artists to be vigilant about the way that they use technology, to not do it blindly and uncritically, but to always keep in mind where the technology comes from, how it was developed. And so the image above, both of the images on this page were appropriated from other materials. The one above talks about using computers for surveillance, and the one below is a count of the intercontinental ballistic missiles held by both sides of the Cold War, NATO and Soviet bloc. And one of my favorite pieces of writing that Gustav Metzger ever did is the Zagreb Manifesto, which he wrote with Gordon Hyde and Jonathan Benthall for an event, a symposium organized by the New Tendencies movement in Zagreb. And I'm going to just read the part boxed in red as a conclusion to my talk. I've got still so many slides. So artists are increasingly striving to relate their work and that of the technologists to the current unprecedented crisis in society. Some artists are responding by utilizing their experience of science and technology to try and resolve urgent social problems. Others, researching in cybernetics and the neurosciences, are exploring new ideas about the interaction of the human being with the environment. Others, again, are identifying their work with the concept of ecology that includes the entire technological environment that man has imposed on nature. There are creative people in science who feel that the man-machine problem lies at the heart of making the computer the servant of man and nature. Such people welcome the insight of the artist in this context, lest we lose sight of humanity and beauty. And again, this was written in 1969. It could not be any more relevant to what we're going through today. And it kind of encapsulates the whole motivation for organizing Electric Dreams the way that I did, to kind of demonstrate how artists and, primarily artists were thinking critically about technology and not just adopting it in a flatly techno-optimistic way already from that time. I'm going to stop here in the interest of time. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much. I think we proceed straight away to Pita and then leave all the questions and comments for the end, okay? So it will be more joined up discussion. And you will see why, because we kind of We've just had a crash course in art technology history, and now we move on to more contemporary landscape. So you will kind of get a glimpse, rush through the whole art technology field just in 1 hour. How amazing it is. So let's do that. Thanks, Val. I will keep to time now, so I will be more strict. Right, so while Pita is setting up, let me introduce her a little bit more. So Pita is currently head of program at Arbeit, which is Digital Art Center in London, in Camden Town. She's also co-founder of Offsite Project, which is a curatorial platform dedicated to supporting new media artists, new media talent. As I have already mentioned, Pita has worked throughout her career with more than 200 artists, helping to develop experimental projects that critically explore the social impact of emerging technologies. Between 2021 and 2024, she was a curator of digital art at Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And she's also co-editor of Digital Art 1960s to Now book with Corinna Gardner and Melanie Lenz of Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And in her presentation, she will introduce examples of contemporary digital arts practitioners, highlighting key themes and concerns in their work, focusing on international artists whose practices explore social impact of emerging technologies. Right, welcome, Pita, and thanks for accepting our invitation again. And floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Josia, Nuno, Daniel, Jose, and also Patricia and Maria and the team that have set up this amazing program and tonight's talk. In response to Val's presentation, I'll be speaking tonight about the contemporary examples of digital art, focusing on artists that I have collaborated with in recent years through different projects, but also the book Digital Art 1960s to Now that Josia mentioned earlier. And this presentation specifically draws inspiration from my essay, Data is the New Gold, Digital Art in the 2000s, that is part of this publication that I'm showing right now on the screen. And to understand today's landscape in digital art, it's important to consider the effect of the World Wide Web, this cultural impact, and also its effects on the arts, and how since the 90s the internet has operated differently. Specifically, the period of the 2000s, also known as Web 2, that is characterized by the disappearance of personal websites and the popularization of user contact platforms that were very familiar nowadays, such as MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, but also research engines like Google and AltaVista. That AltaVista is not that popular nowadays, but it was very important in this particular part of time. And this ideological shift in the internet's architecture from individual spaces that are crafted by people to spaces that are centralized by corporations really changed how information was administered and also coordinated, and all of the content that us as users are creating is kept and stored by these organizations. And in this context, data is co-owned by both users and corporations, and it simultaneously works when we're in our screens as a visual element, but also when it's online, it works as a network point that is being targeted with advertisement and really allows these corporations to track all of our behavior and then in return like tailor all of the advertisement that we see online. And this model was identified as surveillance capitalism by the author Shoshana Zuboff in her 2018 book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And this term really understands us as consumers as the product. And for society, these shifts really means that to be part of online life, we need to dematerialize our bodies and are constantly producing data points or interactions that then algorithm systems can understand and help us to coordinate how we are integrated into these systems. And because can you imagine, artists are responding to this context, and more than ever, we're really thinking about the role of information networks and inquiry into their ecological and social impacts, which is not something new, as Val was mentioning in the presentation. This concept is like a concern that has existed over decades since this technology emerged from military contexts. And nowadays, many digital artists are demonstrated to their work how data has been utilized by corporations to craft a simulacrum of reality, and at the same time, their work is offering to audiences strategies which would to understand how to subvert this corporatized experience of the internet and therefore also the physical world. And for tonight's presentation, I'll be focusing on the work of 13 artists that use data and archives as their main source material to inquire on contemporary technological systems and also to create their own simulacrum of reality that challenge the reality that is built by corporations. And roughly their work can be identified to be more specifically focused on 4 main concerns that are identity, ecology, technology per se, and also cultural heritage. And these themes is just to say that they don't exist in isolation in their work. They also sometimes overlap or interchange in the different artworks that I'll be showing. For example, we have the work of Maya Man. Maya Man is an artist that works with live code and is very interested in questioning identity online and also the experience of growing online and the performance of her identity and how it's documented. In her work, Glance Back from 2018, that is a browser-based extension that you can download in your computer. That artwork is really subversive, how we interact with social media, where we're constantly framing how reality operates, how others perceive us. This extension, in opposition to that, takes a photo of you once a day when you're using your browser, and it asks you a question like, how are you feeling today? And as a result, you have this archive of a very intimate portrait of how you're using the technology or what's happening in your day. And also the idea is that people don't have access to this archive. So it is a very personal perspective on how you use technology and also your everyday life experience. Also working along identity, we have the work of Daniel Braithwaite-Shirley. And Daniel Braithwaite-Shirley is working with game engines, and also she's thinking about Black trans experience and archives and how to document and organize these archives and make them relevant for people outside of the trans communities. And in this specific artwork, I can remember a time I didn't need you from 2020, that is a choose your own adventure video game. Daniel is producing through this video game the experience of habitating a city as a trans person, where you're encountering different scenarios that makes you feel uncomfortable, and it's trying to reflect how trans people feel, but at the same time, the video game archives voices of trans people that are part of the community that Neil is from. We also have the work of Keiken. Keiken are an artistic collective. Also, the word Keiken comes from in Japanese. It means experience, and this is really something that frames their artistic practice, where they based most of their work in immersive storytelling and through world building and interactive experiences. They are also inquiring into the role of technologies and how technologies can operate differently in our society. And in this specific work, Viral Energy Episode 1 from 2021, that is an interactive film. We encounter a character that has a digital twin that you interact with through the screens, but as you go through the film, you can see how the screens start popping up, like how also the digital twin is trying to manipulate the character, the main character in the film, and you get into this psychological experience that we most of us experience offline, but in a very pressurized time. And then we have other artists that are thinking in architecture and also in the politics of digital tools, like Julieta Gil. Julieta Gil is a very interesting artist because she also has a background in architecture, and most of her work focuses on historic sites and how they're imposed as social symbols, and also how they shape collective memory over the years. And in this specific artwork, Nuestra Victoria, from Our Victory, from 2019-20, she documented the Angel of Independence in Mexico City. That is a very emblematic monument that every year in March, it is graffiti through the protests that happen across the city to denounce violence against women. But as you can imagine, the next day the government erased all of the graffiti. So she was like really trying to memorialize this gesture and this manifestation into these 3D models as a way to document those ephemeral moments. And similar to Julieta Gil, we have the work of Ibi Yakam. Ibi Yakam also has a background in architecture, but Ibi Yakam is considering how current technological structures are based on the way that colonial roots were established, and how some of those historical relationships still affect the way technology is framed today. And specifically, she's thinking about West Africa, Nigeria, and in this work, Data, the New Black Gold from 2019, she's documenting to 3D scanning different markets in Lagos, in Nigeria, to show how people live as a consequence of how technology is framed in the country and the city. And we also have the work of Tabitha Reisari. Tabitha Reisari is also focusing on West Africa, but comes from a very different perspective. Tabitha is, again, thinking about like colonial heritage and the impact that it still has in technological frameworks today. But she's thinking or pairing those ideas with pre-Columbian rituals or like ways of thinking or social practices in this artwork, Premium Connect from 2017. She's specifically thinking about the relationship between 12th century Ifa divination systems from the Yoruba people in West Africa and computer predictions that we use nowadays through algorithm systems, linking them through the binary language of 1 and 0 that is used in most of the computers that we still use nowadays, but also in the divination systems from the Yoruba people. And along these lines, we have the work of artists Stephanie Comilang and Simon Spizier. Stephanie and Simon have individual practices, but they sometimes collaborate, and they bring together the Ecuadorian and Filipino cultural heritage to produce these artworks, and again, think about or speculate on how technology could operate today if it incorporated some of the ideologies from those cultural backgrounds. And in this artwork, Piña, Why is the Sky Blue, from 2022, that is a virtual reality film. They are centering the artwork around this character called Piña, that is an AI system that is embodied to this character. So across the artwork, you are seeing a very close the character and your experiences a day in their lives. So it's a very intimate experience where you feel most of the time as you are their phone and you're looking into their world. So in a way, it also has a subtle look into how technology looks at us and the time that we spend collaborating with these systems. We also have the work of Anna Riddle. That Anna Riddle, it's a British artist that is interested in AI systems and machine learning, but she's also linking these systems into how historically we have collected data, and specifically she's thinking about the context of Europe and how European countries and the UK have collecting social data and how that has been administered, and the legacy that has had in how AI systems and machine learning systems have been built today as a consequence. And in this work, Myriad Tulips from 2018, Anna is, as the name says, like she's producing like 1,000 photographs of tulips to manually create a data set. So in machine learning, you utilize I'm just giving some context, just in case of you are not familiar with technology, but in machine learning, you need a large data set, and usually that data set is extracted from the internet. So it mixes analog photography, digital photography, and sometimes synthetic images that are produced by AI. So this artwork is like really reversing that process, and Anna took 1,000 photos of tulips at different species of tulips and tulips at different stages of their lifetime. And then she's also hand tagging all of the tulips to describe the images, the same that we will have with this metadata that is describing all of the images that we have in the internet. And in this process, she's trying to show the labor and also bring transparency in how these images are labeled and the information that they have in the images. We also have the work of Libby Hinney. Libby Hinney has a very interesting background because she also has a PhD in quantum physics, and is one of the first artists that use quantum physics in their practice. And again, like for those of you that are not that acquainted with this technology, quantum computing allows you to potentially produce like multiple predictions at once. So if with an AI system we can run one prediction, these computers allow you to run like thousands of predictions at once. So you can see how the questions are evolving to different directions. And in movies or sci-fi, like a lot of these machines are represented to the multiverse. So we see characters having changes in their life and then like a totally different experience of life. So this will be like very linked into quantum computing. And in this artwork, Wild Data from 2023, that is a playable experience, Libby Hinney gathered data from different forests from the north of England, and she created a landscape that you navigate, again, like similar to the work that Stephanie Comilang and Simon Spicer produced. You have a very disembodied experience, so you don't see your body through this navigation, and the landscape really becomes a system that is self-organized, so really representing how nature already works and showing what will happen if we were in part of nature and if humans have been working outside of capital technological systems. And also the way that the experience is run, like you have 3 different levels, so you encounter different landscapes that again are related to this data that she gathered from the north of England. And because the experience, I really frees you from all of the rules, tags, and rewards that you usually have in video games, where you really have to produce a task or find an object to pass to the next level. It's really thinking about how to inverse the dynamics that we have in video games. And just to finalize the presentation, I'm gonna show you a couple of examples that have like a more physical output and how these artworks exist in the physical space, and that are also related to projects that I have worked with. So we have the work of Su-Wen Chung, and in 2022 I worked with Su-Wen Chung to acquire the first neural network model that it's part of the National Collection of the UK, and that was acquired for a museum that is dedicated to arts. And again, sorry if I'm over-explaining, but like a neural network model, it's an AI-driven system that is inspired by the human brain, and that's where the name comes from. And it's learning patterns using data that is input into the system, and then through interconnected nodes is making relations across those patterns. And the way Su-Wen uses this neural network is very similar to the work of Harold Cohen that we were seeing in Val's presentation. That it was like the robot turtle, but Su-Wen has worked with drawing operations systems generation X, that she also calls DOC, for over 10 years, where she had input the AI system with more than 20 years of her drawings and her artistic expression and gesture. And as a result, we have an autonomous system that is responding to her drawing live. And it's also very interesting how the system has evolved and its physicality has evolved over the years. That when Su-Wen started this project in 2015, she was working with a robot arm that had a more DIY aesthetic. And as you can see in this image from 2021, like this robot arm has evolved a lot, and more recently, she has been using the AI system in a virtual reality environment where it's responding live to her gesture, so they are creating more physical objects together on space. And we have also the work of Maurizio Lahayari. Maurizio Lahayari is an artist from Iran that is working on applying digital tools for decolonization purposes and really trying to repatriate cultural heritage and objects using digital tools. So she works a lot with 3D scanning. If you're interested in her work, like she published a work that is available online called 3D Activists that shows like 100 artworks, that compiles 100 artworks from different artists that are using 3D printed for political purposes. And in this work, Speculations of Capture from 2023-2024 that I co-commissioned with Catherine Troiano, the curator of photography at the Victoria and Albert Museum, Maurizio was looking at specifically at 12 objects from the Middle East collection that were acquired by the museum in the 1800s, and there are medieval tools that people in Tehran and Pakistan, where the objects were taken from, were using them for very practical purposes. And through studying the objects, 3D scanning them, having that close access to them, but also to all the archive material that mark their acquisition from the museum and how they arrived from Tehran to the UK, Maurizio created this film, an installation that speculates on the roots and also what happened with the people that were left behind. And towards the end, like, the work has a very positive output because some of the characters are holding back the objects. So she's really speculating on how those objects can come back to the people. And I'm just going to show you very briefly 2 examples of more recent projects. This is the work of Oria Harvey. Oria Harvey is an artist that started working in the 90s, creating live streaming performance. With live stream was quite difficult to achieve because the internet was very slow, and also platforms like YouTube didn't exist. And in the 2000s, she also created her independent video game studio Tales of Tales with Mikhail Samin. And more recently, she has been doing a 3D scanning and thinking about public monuments. She's based in Rome, so a lot of the inspiration from this work and her recent practice comes from living in this city full of public monuments and ruins. And in this specific artwork, Red Rum 3 and Red Rum 4 from 2025, that was commissioned by Arbeit, she's using archives very differently because she worked to outsource debris from places of war from the last 5-10 years that you can see on the sculpture on your right. And she also collected fossils and graffiti from historical sites to compose these to three-dimensional digital sculptures. And these works are part of the exhibition. This room is a sculpture called Prophecy that is on view right now at Arbeit, where she brought together Greek mythology with Catholicism and some of their figures to recontextualize them and show how social inequality and war has affected human nature from centuries ago, but then how technology is still now kind of framing some of those conflicts that we have personal and collectively. And the last example that I'm going to show you is a work of Ambi Drew, that is a British artist that is really inquiring into what happens with female identity, e-commerce, and algorithms collide. And in these specific works of bodies called Machines that she's gonna open at Arbeit in April 16. In her films of bodies called Machines, she is really embodying the psychological effects of that experience of trying to portray certain beauty standards that are attached to female identity, and also how these products that are created by AI have a very deep impact on how people see themselves and how they express themselves online. And she generated, as part of the film, there are some scenes in the film where she's using these prosthetics that really change the shape of her face through the artwork. And just to conclude, I really hope this presentation gives you hope in the technological moment, and these artworks also makes you feel a little bit like you have agency over these technologies and not everything is lost. And if you want to learn more about the book Digital Art 1960s to Now, you can scan the QR code. And also, if you're ever in London, I'll be very happy to see you at Arbeit. And you have the address there. So, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Is it working? Yes, it is working. Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much, both of you, for your very rich, fantastic presentations that actually could be, a long-term, one-year course in art, technology, history, and contemporary landscape. And this is just the beginning of the whole field. But what I really... So they are sort of very packed presentations, and I'm very aware of it, but the intention behind this session was to try and give introduction to the field and point to some references, both historical and contemporary, that you can explore later. But also we've signposted several artists that are part of this program. So thanks, Pita, for doing this. You've worked with all of them. Libby Heaney, who will be last in our program, will focus on future thinking, so it's quantum. Tabitha Rezer with her work around, technology and colonial aspects. Who else did we have? Kaiken and Danielle Brefway-Shirley, who will be next week here, I believe, so very soon, yes. With performance, and then Kaiken in April, I think, also with game experience. They're working on game engines and create their own games. So I hope it's exciting what's to come. But today, really, we wanted to open up, give some foundations and open up discussion. Obviously, it can be a very long discussion, and we don't have that much time left. But I wanted this presentation to be as long as they needed to be to give enough references. And I just want to start, obviously, we'll open to your comments and questions, but I just wanted to start with a couple of comments. First of all, in your both presentations, you both mentioned a historical connection between art technology field and how it's formed from Western-centric, Euro and North American-centric tech, military, industry sort of context. And that's very troubling history, obviously. We think about it today very differently. It has colonial links, and it has very exclusionary. It's one particular narrative that is very narrow and very, for the lack of better word, exclusionary. And what is present in both of your works, both historically and contemporary, is, I think, what is very conscious, dedicated effort to sort of revise those histories and contemporary narrative around this. And you, Val, you mentioned, how you tried to bring different connections to a very kind of established and narrow and particular history through in your exhibition to open up, bring different references, include more women, but also include works and connections, highlight those connections, beyond the Euro, North American-centric contributions. And the same with you, Pita. You work with a lot of women artists, female artists, with particular topics, also expanding beyond this kind of orthodox, traditional, established, narrow view of art technology field. So I just wanted quickly to, and obviously exhibitions, and we're starting with curatorial work and exhibitions because they reflect, its time and reflect, beyond singular practices. So this is why this first session. And I wanted to ask you, and you both work in particular institutional context. So Val working for a very sort of big, monumental institution that has its own life and operations and working. And Pita, you worked with V&A, Victoria Albert Museum, which is similar to Tate in terms of, kind of institutional infrastructure. Now you work for a different institution. It's Arbeit. It's very much dedicated to digital art, so it's slightly different. But I just wanted you to very briefly maybe just reflect on your strategies for revising art history, for working with institutions in this way to open up the field and not to say sneak in, but sort of like bring those different approaches to very institutional ways of working. So maybe just a couple of reflections on strategies, how you make decisions about bringing artists that you want to highlight, how you want to disrupt those narratives, establish narratives, and whether it is very kind of localized. I mean, obviously we can talk about Portugal and Porto in particular, how you deal with opening up those histories, but few comments.
Should I start? So it's definitely an effort that applies to Tate as an institution as a whole. The international collection, the way that it was built was international, but in a very narrow concept of derived from Western art history. And so when Tate Modern was opened in 2000, it's hard to believe that there wasn't a dedicated flagship museum for modern and contemporary art in London before then. When the museum was conceptualized, when the collection displays were rehung for the big opening in 2000, there was this kind of understanding of just how much was missing from it. To be fair, there were already also lots of lacunae for the Western art historical kind of canonical narratives. But one strategy that Tate adopted from then onwards was to hire curators and that have regional specialisms, and to set up acquisition committees that would do specific research in certain regions that were overlooked. And so one at a time, various overall regions, beginning with Latin America, Africa, North Africa, and Western Asia, and then East Asian Pacific region. One at a time, all of the acquisition committees were set up to focus on researching artists that practice in those regions, which is an important thing to avoid just acquiring works by the ones that get commercially boosted by galleries, and actually working with the artists on the territory and see also historical practices that have been systematically overlooked. And then those works get integrated into the collection. So I worked with the Tate collection for many years, and kind of learned from my colleagues the strategies for how to research and look at deeper histories. It's important, as I mentioned, for me at least, to look at histories that just avoid the whole paradigm of center and periphery altogether, and that consider networks of histories and artists that were connected to each other directly or indirectly through knowing each other's work and correspondence or mail art, and to kind of bring out those histories and integrate them into the narrative of the exhibition. So for Electric Dreams in particular, I really was looking at those moments when those artists demonstrated how they were looking at each other's work and boosting each other's practices, the New Tendencies being a case in point. But there's also the obverse of that, which is that some artists worked more in isolation, and therefore if you only focus on networked practices, you risk leaving out important practices. And so I would also need to make sure that certain artists were fitting in. To give an example, Katsuhiro Yamaguchi, the Japanese artist that was one of the founding members of Jiken Kobo, or the experimental workshop in Japan, in Tokyo, which was slightly less internationally connected than groups like Gutai, who were kind of discovered by European and American curators early on, and kind of brought to travel internationally. Someone like Katsuhiro Yamaguchi was a huge figure, especially a foundational figure for media art in Japan, but not very well known abroad. And so I wanted to dedicate a monographic room to his practice in order to just look at the individual practice of an artist that doesn't necessarily easily connect to the rest. I think I'll leave it there. About the women, I just want to rep my colleagues. I'm wearing a T-shirt for Radical Software, which is an exhibition that was at Mudam in Luxembourg and at the Wien Kunsthalle in Vienna, dedicated to women in computing in the arts in the 20th century. I mean, of course, it's also the name of a journal, a magazine about television, video art, and new media art, but the exhibition was kind of running parallel to Electric Dreams, and I felt a lot of camaraderie with Michelle Cotton, the curator of that exhibition, and really making an effort to bring out the women in those histories that have always been there and have made incredible foundational work, but as per usual, get systematically bulldozed by male-dominated histories. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, because, it's a fantastic example how curators are not only doing works, but also living and wearing statements, so that's fantastic. And I have to say, it's really fantastic for me also to listen to the context behind, sort of mechanisms behind these exhibitions. I have to admit that I was extremely ecstatic when Electric Dreams was announced at Tate, and I went to visit several times. But it's very different to have your experience, as a visitor, but it's very different to see the thinking behind it. And I do remember this diagram, your diagram, and I stared at it, and I just couldn't really quite get it. And now it makes sense that this is rooms, but I was thinking it was something else, so it wasn't quite clear. And then I was thinking, what are all these people that I know, but they are omitted from it? And why they are not, I can understand not everyone can be in exhibition, because obviously exhibitions and curatorial practice is about, as much including as much as excluding. And you can't fit everyone, but why they are not on this diagram? And I was kind of going through it through my art history course myself in my head, thinking. So that's really explained. So thanks very much, and I love your T-shirt, definitely. And Pita, what are your what is your take? What are your strategies in those different contexts that you work with?
They're very two different contexts and also ways to approach this. Specifically with the V&A, the digital art collection started in the late 60s with Cybernetic Serendipity. That was a show that has been mentioned multiple times that happened at ICA. And this collection grew over the years, and especially in the 2000s, grew exponentially. So at the moment, I think they have around 3,000 objects. And I can say, 80% of those objects are works made by male artists. So specifically when we were working with this project for the book, we were thinking about the audience, that is a very contemporary audience. It is created for people that live in a globalized society, and where we have a very different reality than maybe when the collection started. So we were really thinking about how we could reflect on the world where the book was going to be launched. So, and also how we could build from the B&A collection and outwards. So a lot of it is representing the present moment and how technology is globalized, and maybe things that are set up in California are manufactured in India, and that will have an effect on how the technology is built. So we try to bring a very global perspective and a lot of female contemporary artists into the book and these histories to reflect different perspectives of how the technology can be used and also conceptualized. And more specifically, with the work that I do at Arrebai, that it is a very different organization that is really framed around digital arts, and I'm thinking about the critical perspective on how technology is used today and also affecting society. Again, I'm thinking about how to reflect the present moment and how to bring a different perspective. And I also, to be honest, growing up in the 2000s, and at the point that we're at the moment, where in media that everything is directing us into the end of the world, and everything is very pessimistic. And for us as individuals, it's very hard to imagine where the future can take us. I think starting to think about different societies and how people live with this technology, it can give a more positive perspective, especially thinking about indigenous societies and how they already went through the end of their world, of their civilization, and how they're now working and operating with technologies is something that I am thinking more and more on how to integrate it into the program and the way we frame technology at Arrebai.
Brilliant, thank you. We have a few more minutes, and I open up the floor for questions, comments, but I just have one more burning comment that I want to make, or actually comment question. Because obviously when we talk about history and art history and curatorial work and your projects, the issue of temporality is very sort of present there. even in titles of your exhibition and your book. So the Tate exhibition was called Electric Dreams. I've forgotten already.
Art and technology before the internet.
That's it, before the internet, so up until 90s, curiously. And then your book is called, Digital Art, 1960s to now. So there's this already very strongly indicated temporality of the field. But actually, so that's one part of the sort of comment. But the other part of the comment is that, working with art technology has its own temporality, which is very different to temporality in linear art history. We're thinking about generative work, feedback loops, and so on. It has a very different, technology thinks very differently about time, which is not linear. Whereas curatorial work and institutions and art history is still very linear, really. So I wanted to ask you about your kind of comments on this. How do you deal with temporality in your work, but also with kind of reflecting on temporality of the artworks that use technologies in this way?
I was thinking about the temporal dimension of the moment of encounter with the artwork as well, which, it's its own superimposed temporal dimension onto the historicized, if not strictly linear, narrative that I gave to Electric Dreams. So, the importance that many of those artists, especially the experiential or interactive ones, like the cybernetic sculptures by Wen Tsai, require the presence of the viewer in the space, and that kind of, moment of presence, experiential one. And as you mentioned, there's a kind of understanding of the potential temporal expansion of something that is set up as an algorithm that could therefore continue to generate forms or bits of code or what have you in time. And even, perceptual abstract artists, or the kind of so-called open kinetic artists, were thinking about their form of generative work in terms of an infinity, the potentiality of infinite permutations of the kind of algorithms that they were setting up. Hulule Park talks about it, and how when he set up a 14-color palette and started permutating those laid out 14-color dots or squares, he was already thinking about how many years, much longer than his own livable life, it was possible to continue to generate works based on those permutations as well. Obviously these are only some, and in my curatorial interest, I think about deep time a lot, the deep time of the geological time that is necessary to produce the materials that then are put into the technologies, the technological tools that make that computation possible, or the every-when, cyclical conception of time that First Nations types of knowledges can bring to the understanding of technology. I had a work in Electric Dreams, early virtual reality work by Lawrence Paul Juk-Velupten, who's a Coast Salish artist, and was created this very early, like 1991, 92, work that makes a comparison between virtual reality and the spiritual plane of communing with mythological figures from Coast Salish folklore. And so also other types of temporality that are parallel to technology, but understood from a perspective that's completely different from the Western time paradigms that the Silicon Valley oligarchs are thinking of when they create their technological tools. So yeah, there's so much more to talk about.
I feel like like especially with the contemporary, I'm always like considering like within like the technology, the time frames for 10 years, and this is something that we did with the book, that it was like decade by decade book, because it is the time that it takes for the technology to become obsolete or to change into another technology, and the people like lose their interest. And then if they were very interested in predictive machines in the 60s, then at the end of the 70s they're interested in virtual reality, and then by the 80s they're interested in computer graphics, and then in the 90s in the World Wide Web, and now we're very interested in machine learning processes and data. So I think, like that time span is also something that I apply more purposely on the projects that I'm doing with, and also because of the audience engagement with the artwork, because I work with a contemporary organization. So the idea is that when you come to the gallery, you understand how the technology operates, and you can like really recognize yourself in the artwork that you're seeing. But similar to you, I have that experience with technology. Like I feel like it really surpassed like a lot of like our lifetimes. While I was working at the Biennial, I was working with objects that were like 5,000 years old. I really thinking about human creativity and that legacy that really is beyond our lifespans, and how like these technologies that existed centuries ago are influencing the way like technology operates, or using a similar system, even if it's not something that it's think when the technology is like operated. Like for example, with Mauritian Lahayari and that artwork that I was showing with medieval tools from Tehran and Pakistan, she was also focusing on astrolabes. Astrolabes were these apparatus were used like to measure the stars and then make predictions. And a lot of like royals from the region use them even in contemporary settings. In the early 20th century, they were still using astrolabes for these collective predictions. And that similar systems from the astrolabes were applied to the way like weather machines were predicting the weather. So they have a lot of similarities in how their systems are built. And I think even with a technology like AI, that it looks quite contemporary. Like AI really like traces back to the 50s, and the technology evolves, and we get very excited about it, and then we lose interest, and then like another version or iteration of it appears, and again like there's a lot of expectations on what it can happen. It becomes quite speculative. And now we think about AI, and we have like similar questions that we were like also seeing in your presentation. Like, is this technology, like there's that fear of it's gonna take over us, like what's gonna happen? Like a lot of those questions in the last 60, 70 years haven't been resolved. So like definitely technology has that span of time that really is beyond our understanding in many ways.
I think this is a great moment to open up and bring you to the discussion. Are there any burning comments? Because as you can see, we can talk and talk forever. But and while we're having microphone delivered, you mentioned about AI thinking going back to 1950s, but actually, if you think about it, really, we can even go back to Ada Lovelace, who actually hinted in her, Ada Lovelace was a daughter of Lord Byron, English poet. In 1830s, she wrote what is widely regarded as first computer algorithm on paper that would have worked on a computer by Charles Babbage had it been finished, and it wasn't finished. And her comments, which were notes in the translation of someone's work, are regarded as a kind of computer's, software, actually, something, the sort of operating computer. And there she hinted on the sort of possibilities of computers beyond just simple calculation, beyond sort of like thinking about, creativity in a very different way. And very often we sort of go back to how to think about first kind of mention of thinking. It wasn't called artificial intelligence. It was no concept like this at the time, but it was already hinted. So, sorry, just a digression, because I worked on Ada Lovelace a bit, and I really wanted to bring her in addition to Charles Babbage and his first idea for universal computer. So sorry, floor is yours.
That's fine.
I will not say anymore.
I was actually picking up on AI, of course, because it's nowadays topic. And I was wondering, of course, it comes a long way from now, from history we didn't talk about AI per se, but we talk about machine learning and all those stuff. And well, I was wondering how it will be, or I can pose it as a challenge, how we'll see if a few years from now we'll be curating the technological imagination before and after today's AI. Do you see yourselves doing it? What will be the challenge? And also, we see another question probably, we see more and more artists collaborating in commons with AI that is becoming so powerful that mostly each one of us use it nowadays as an assistant or as a fellow creator, possibly. How do you feel the impact that will have on contemporary media art? In questions, of course, that we are all debating of authorship, ethics. Is it really a collaboration? Is it a new way of creativity? I don't know. Just some questions for you to.
It's the tiny one.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah. Just to keep us here all night. No.
Yeah.
Exactly. Is everyone ready for the night here? Who would want to start?
Well,
all right.
I can be more concrete. So, do you see yourself curating exhibitions regarding the before and after AI nowadays? And what are the challenges on doing that kind of work? And how you see yourself, the impact that AI has been having on today's artists and media arts?
I mean, part of my reasoning for doing Electric Dreams in the first place was precisely to think about discourses around automation, not necessarily AI as such, but various approaches to automation as well. There was a particular moment in time in the mid-20th century when this idea that computers were beginning to encroach on workplaces was really scary. And talk about automation was very similar in language, well, up to a point, because of course there wasn't as much lingo of computing in everyday parlance. But as far as people were aware of the fact that the powers that be were beginning to think about computing as automating certain tasks, there was a panic about, are we all going to lose our jobs? So fast forward to today, and the automation revolution did happen in the mid-20th century with relatively little impact on the workforce. There was definitely, though. And actually, there's an interesting connection with the fact that Experiments in Art and Technology's headquarters in New York was in a building called Automation House, which had previously been used by trade unionists that were specifically putting pressure on companies to think about automation or to make sure that the rights of the workers were prioritized over the necessity to save money through automation. So again, it's kind of a recursive issue, although now it really feels like there is sort of no going back, and impact on people's ability to survive and earn money on a day-to-day basis is going to be impacted on a scale that is unprecedented. From the point of view of art, at least, because I can't really speak, I'm not enough of a technologist to be able to express that. opinion intelligently enough. But I personally find that there's a lot of artistic practices that use AI in a critical way, in the sense that the work that the artists do reflect on the impact of AI on philosophical questions that AI brings to the fore. There's also endless amounts of artists that just use AI, and it's not quite the same thing. In my mind, I value conceptual clarity about how artists approach technology, and this applies to other ways that they use technology as well, not just AI, but previous aspects as well. So when I express my interest in someone like Harold Cohen, it's not to be an apologist for prompt pushes, but I'm very interested in the way that Harold Cohen was looking at symbolic artificial intelligence as a simulacra of, or what better still, as a way of unpacking what is it that makes an image if you remove the human element and try and, again, in inverted commas, teach a machine how to draw from sets of instructions. Where do you get the machine to the point where an image is recognizable by human beings as an image? Because the machine doesn't know that it's an image. And even more interesting, that kind of symbolic, quite primitive, narrow AI didn't have any reference of external reality. Unlike the large language models or neural networks that are at the basis of AI now that use, huge data sets of images. Aaron didn't have any of that. It just had instructions in programming language inserted by the artist that resulted in what human beings would then perceive as images. So there's layers there. There's ways of thinking about artists using AI as ways of understanding what it means to exist alongside artificial intelligences, but also in terms of the language of collaborating with them. I think the AIs that we're using now are still way too dumb to talk about a real collaboration and to begin to worry about the question of authorship. We will probably cross that threshold at some point in the not too distant future, maybe. I don't know, again, not a technologist. But for now, it is only at a metaphorical level that you can make that case. And I often also look back at the history of photography and how when photography was invented, the pencil of nature was kind of a problematic entity for artists that began to worry about, are we going to lose our livelihood if we are not needed anymore for making portraits of people? And, art didn't die because of photography. So we're going through a different kind of paradigmatic, huge shift, although it does, again, feel like the longer and wider consequences are going to be of a different scale. And the fact that industry pushes a certain type of AI onto the consumer is also a huge worry in my book.
Yeah, I also feel like it depends on how you define collaboration and creativity, because tinkering with a machine and not knowing what the output is gonna be and just using to create an image, I wouldn't define that as art per se, from my curatorial perspective. But then it's opening a bigger question of what's art, what's considered art and why. But most of the artists that I'm working with, they're really thinking about philosophical questions around the technology, and they know how to use the technology, they know how to code, how to build the systems from scratch, and they're really intentional in what they want to create. And usually what is more important for them is the process, or that interaction with the technology and how it expresses a moment, instead of the aesthetical output that you have. yeah, like maybe like a good example is Su-Wen Chung. Like I was showing her work earlier, and Su-Wen has been working with this neural network model doc for over a decade now, and she does see the AI system as a collaborator. But she's not really like trying to create a very specific aesthetical output to it. Like they have really feedback each other's like work through that like 10 years process. And I think like at the end, like we need to like think that in arts, like the important side of it is always like the human perspective, the relevance to society from the way that I work, rather than like thinking about aesthetics or like how technology can be used to create a very specific aesthetic experience.
I hope that explains a little bit. I think there's a lot in that question that is packed, but yes. Are there any other comments, questions? Or are we sufficiently cold and frozen and we need to...
Hungry.
And hungry? There are more questions, great.
Hello. I'm here. Hello. Okay, so my question is, both of you brought up a lot the story behind the piece, right? What the artist did, like for Aaron, like the piece of Aaron, for me it's very interesting the fact that at some point the artist looked back and was like, oh, actually, let's dial back a little bit. And we know how challenging it can be to share that story in a curatorial setting in a museum, because as you said in the beginning of your talk, you also don't want to flood people with a giant text because they're not going to read it. So in a context of especially such pressing new arts where people often don't have a lot of references and information the same way that we might have with like older, more classical movements in art, how can you explain things to your audience in a way that makes them think and makes them grow and actually interact with the pieces in a very profound way without overwhelming them and getting them bored? And I will append that with, and how do you do that in specifically for people who are not artists? Because we also know that there is a tendency to have mostly artists going to galleries and going to these things. So how can you actually also talk to a non-artistic public in a way where they understand and they are moved? Thank you.
I'd start by saying the current Tate approach to interpretation is to not take anything for granted. So when you were saying, oh, maybe with new media art, you cannot take for granted that people will know the way that they know about certain movements. We don't even take that for granted anymore. So you're explaining everything, but not in too much detail because people are not going to read the texts. So you kind of have to give just enough tools for visitors to be able to form their own opinions as well about what they're looking at. More information that gives you background about what was happening in the life of an artist when they made that piece, rather than how you're supposed to be feeling about it or what it means, because the style of interpretation, at least now, is to not over-explain, but generate curiosity or set the scene for that interpretation, that last bit of interpretation to be provided by the viewer. It's a constant challenge, and I don't think it can ever be resolved. You kind of have to pick and choose, depending on the context, what bits of information you want to provide. It's a bit draconian in my workplace, because they're really quite strict about how many words per caption, and I don't sleep at night thinking about the things that I want to say about an artwork that I can't fit in a caption. And so it really is an art, and it's not limited to curators as such. I mean, of course, that's only in larger institutions, I suppose, but at Tate at least there is a dedicated team that looks at interpretation texts and discusses them with curators. A lot of what they do is undoing kind of the intellectual overcomplications that curators sometimes put in the texts to unpick the academic training, which is counterintuitive because you go to university for, in my case, like 25 years. And then you have to undo all of that language in order to make it more accessible for a general viewer. You also are always, or are never gonna make everyone happy, because some people will complain that the caption or the interpretation texts are too generic and they would like to have more of an insight. And the only solution there is to provide a kind of layering of information by, in some cases you can provide QR codes pointing at more. If you want to know more, you can find more information here and here and here. But then there's also a bit of a love-hate relationship between museums and QR codes and how many you can provide and where they lead you. Somehow this question for me is almost as difficult as is AI going to end humanity. So maybe I'll leave it at that. But yeah, just it is quite almost an existential question for curators, especially in a place like Tate.
I think in my case, and with the context of Arbeit, is always thinking about concept first and like putting outside a question for the audience. Because if you start like explaining the technology first and how it works, like it is, you already lose the audience like halfway. So it really has to cause that connection that makes you want to interact with the artworks, stay in the space, and read more about the works you are seeing. And we also develop booklets. We do interviews with the artists, with the curators. We do like a set of programming that really is unpacking the exhibitions and the programming that we're running in the gallery. But yeah, I would say like that's probably why we were always saying like concept first, or speaking why the practice is relevant to the technology instead of framing the work around the technology per se.
Can I add just a small thing?
Okay.
With Electro Dreams, there's also the added element that we expected a lot of visitors to not really be familiar with the technology at all. Like we had to explain what the plotter printer is, which I literally had an argument with the interpretation team. But that's true. Like, kids these days, and they're scrolling, they might have to have the concept of needing to program a printer to then plot out the coordinates in order to produce a piece of printed media in a way that is not immediately intuitive for them. So it was quite challenging to not just explain technology, like what exactly the artist did, but the fact that it was historic, like that at that moment it was the only way that an image could be produced. There was nothing else that could output an image from a computer.
Yeah, I feel the more you remove the people from the time the technology was made, you really need to also explain that context, because otherwise it becomes quite abstract. Even to explain how the internet was functioning when I was growing up using a dial-up is like very different to the experience of the internet, like most of you I have grown up.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to have to draw it to a close, unless there's anything very, very burning, but I don't think there is anymore. So thank you all for being here with us. Thank you to Val and Pita for your fantastic stories. I've really enjoyed and I really personally learned so much more. So thank you, and thank you to the organizers for having us. And just to signpost, next week is Danielle with her performance, I believe, interactive performance. So I hope you will enjoy and stay with us for the rest of the program. And hopefully I'll see you in May for Libby Heaney performance.